to very much start and model what we'd like to do today, I'd like to call on one of the teachers who is here in our midst. And this is one of the teachers who is at Chime Elementary School. And for those of you that don't know Chime in so many ways is a great model of what an inclusive school environment can look like. I've had the privilege of spending a day on the campus at Chime, and I came away with a completely different view of basically everything I thought I knew before as an educator got turned upside down with a day on Chime, and it was just amazing. So I'd like to now introduce one of the first grade teachers at Chime who's going to share a little bit about her own story, Esther Nodal. Esther.
I was going to try to just use my teacher voice and project, but I'll use the microphone. My name is Esther Nodal. I am a first grade teacher at Chime. I started actually as a fourth grade teacher at Chime, but I have a very unique story. In 1998, I was diagnosed as being legally blind, and that changed my world upside down. I had to change career paths. I had to decide what I was going to do with myself at that point. I was a medical legal proofreader, interesting enough, so I couldn't do my job anymore. So the community was something that helped me tremendously. I reached out to the community, and with the support of the State Department of Rehabilitation and then Pierce and CSUN, I was able to then get an education to become a teacher. And I was able to do that with the use of a lot of assistive technology, a technology that has gone from really big equipment and now to something as simple as my phone, my iPhone. And I have special glasses that I use. But my technology and my assistive aids have changed over time. And I receive a lot of support from the community at CSUN and at Pierce through student services. I was able to go to those departments and receive the support I needed. I was able to use their technology that they introduced me to initially through my doctors at Kaiser. And I see low vision specialists at Kaiser. So I had a huge support from my community and obviously through my family and friends. And so with all of that support, I was able to become a professional with a disability, which was something that was very concerning to my family, of course, and for myself, because I was in a place of concern and a place of where do I go next. So what ended up happening was lovely place, CSUN, loved being there. It got a fabulous education. But my student teacher supervisors said, you know, there's this place that we would like you to do your student teaching at. It was my second semester of student teaching, so that was full day student teaching. My first semester wasn't as successful for me. I was still kind of uncomfortable and getting to know who I was as a person with a disability. And so they said, there's this place, it's called Chime. And there might be students on this campus who have vision impairments or who are legally blind, and you might be able to use their equipment. So we're going to place you there. Well, I've never left. So I had to learn how to be a self-advocate for myself, and I had to go to my administrators and the principals and say to them, you know, this is what I need to be successful. And they provided me with that. Absolutely no questions asked. And I've been teaching now for 12 years, and I continue to teach till I can't teach anymore. And so now my job, which is fabulous, is now including other children with disabilities. So I can take my experience and support them in being successful, and hopefully they will be successful adults. So my goal is to teach them self-advocacy. They're first graders, but I still try to teach them self-advocacy with or without disabilities. It's a really important skill to have. And then I always, always, always have high expectations. I expect the best from them and nothing but the best from them. And I always include families, and I try to get the community support as much as I can. So I've now taken my experience, which has been an amazing experience, and now I can use it in my teaching and making sure that I'm effectively including students with disabilities and giving them the skills and the knowledge to go out and to move on in their lives. So it's been a fabulous journey, and I have a really funny story for you. So I have a neighbor teacher. I've been her neighbor teacher for quite some time now. And I had a student one year who would have some behaviors, and he would come in the room and he would hide. And I knew he was in there, but I could never see him. So I would always go to her and say, hey, I think so-and-so's in the classroom. I did not want him to know I couldn't find him. And can you just walk around with me and see if you can? Sure enough, he was always in the classroom. And she reminded me of that story, and we laughed about it. It's also important to laugh at yourself once in a while. But not only are the principals and the staff at my school like amazing, but my team is more supportive and accommodating and making sure that they never reduce expectation on me. I am expected to do my job the best I know how, but they give me tools and help me to do that. So hopefully we can help do that with all of our students. It's really an honor to be here today. Thank you so much.
Esther, thank you so much. We appreciate hearing from you. I'd like to introduce another one of our very special guests who has joined us in progress. Please welcome the Chief Strategy Officer of LAUSD, Matt Hill. Matt, would you say hello? And now I'd like us to shift and move into our first guided conversation, and this is Emerging Pathways for Educators. As I mentioned, everyone's bio is in your program, so I'm not going to read the elaborate bios that are there. You can take a look at that and find out all of the amazing things that our presenters today have done professionally. But let me just say that I have the privilege of sitting as a commissioner on the California Commission for Teacher Credentialing. And it gives me an insight to some of our policy work in Sacramento. And this is a very, very exciting time. There's a lot going on, and we have a vision in California, and we're moving it forward in many ways. And of course, we heard a few minutes ago from our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson, who is a major leader in that. And the other major leader, of course, is our California State Board of Education. And so together, the superintendent, the state board, in collaboration with CTC, have called together a statewide special education task force. And we're going to hear from our next two panelists who are involved in that work, among with many other things. But what's so important about this work is we are collectively, statewide, working on a new vision for responding and working with our children with disabilities. And the big part of that is the ways to bring general education, special education together so we have true partnership and integrated and seamless services, and we think differently about how we all live and exist as teachers. So it's my great privilege to introduce our next two, our panelists. We have Dr. Carl Cohn, who is the chair of the statewide Special Education Task Force and a member of the California State Board of Education. Of course, he's had just an illustrious career in public education and is just one of the great leaders and great friends of all of ours. And after Dr. Cohn speaks, we'll hear from Dr. Vicki Graf, who's professor of special education at LMU, longtime director of our special ed program until just recently, also a member of the statewide special education task force, and a national and international leader in issues related to children with disabilities. So please welcome our panelists, and we'll start with Dr. Carl Cohn.
Thanks, Jim. Absolutely delighted to be here with you this morning, and I have to acknowledge the extraordinary president of this university, my good friend, David Burcham. Many people don't know that before David distinguished himself as an outstanding law student here, an outstanding professor, a dean, a provost, and these last 5 years as your president, he was an outstanding K-12 educator. When David and I were really young, we were on the faculty of Long Beach Poly High School together. I was a counselor and Dave was the activities director. And we recognized back then that he was an outstanding leader. And Poly High School in the 1970s had tremendous challenges, and we worked together in order to bring people together, the type of skills that he has used here. So I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that you've had an extraordinary president here for the past 5 years. The work on special education, I'm involved in a lot of activities, both here in the state of California and across the country. In addition to what I do at Claremont, I'm also heading the evaluation of the DC public schools for the National Research Council. I'm also chair of the ACT board in Iowa City. And I'm also chairing a statewide task force on discipline. How do we alter the pipeline to prison, sponsored by the California Endowment and EdSolutions. Changing ACT, changing the DC public schools, reducing suspensions and expulsions, all of that is easier than the challenge that we are going to talk about today. This is really big change if we can pull it off. My views on special education, I'm sometimes embarrassed to acknowledge that I had been a school superintendent for 10 years before I accepted the responsibility of being the federal court monitor for the special education consent decree in Los Angeles. One of the things that the consent decree required was a monthly meeting between the monitor and the district's parent council, parents of special education students. For the first time in my life, I got to know parents of students with disabilities. And I got to know and understand how difficult it was to get the things that they needed for their children. And this is after having served as a superintendent of schools, after having tried to, quote, fix special education in Long Beach. I encountered a situation where I learned so much from parents about the importance of this issue. And so I sort of took a silent vow that if I ever had an opportunity to make things better for all of these parents statewide, I would jump at that opportunity. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about dramatic, big change in the area of special education, and it will require everyone to do things differently. A couple of weeks ago, I stopped by a meeting of SELPA directors and special education directors in Southern California. It happened to be in my hometown, which is Palm Springs. I was struck by two things, and this is the heart of what we're trying to change on this important issue. So all of these directors were there in the room. They were talking about the fact that none of them were on the superintendent's cabinet. None of them. They were talking about the fact that they were isolated and that they carried this label. They were seen as separate and apart from the fundamental changes that were taking place in the districts where they worked. The other thing that struck me about this 3-day meeting in Palm Springs, it was totally sponsored by lawyers. no host bars, come to this, come to that, law firms picking up the tab, which speaks volumes, again, about the type of change that's necessary. So what we're proposing is that it's no longer an isolated place, it's no longer a label, it's no longer about legal compliance, it's all about getting kids the expertise and the services that they need. And if we can pull this off, this is change on a grand scale. So I was talking to two gentlemen over here this morning, and of course, I'm always working. So I said, one's a principal, the other's an elementary teacher, and I said, so let me get your reaction. If the statewide task force says that the vast majority of youngsters with disabilities ought to be educated in regular gen ed classrooms, what is your reaction to that? And the responses were not, oh my God. They were positive, which shows me that the schools involved in the Promised Neighborhood are probably further down the path to getting this right. So the idea, again, is a change that gets away from compliance and focuses on outcomes for students. Outcomes for students who are no longer isolated, no longer a label, no longer just a place, but students who take their place first and foremost as gen ed students that we need to do more. So that's how I'm thinking as I approach this work, but I'm acknowledging up front, out of all the things that we're attempting to do in California, from LCFF, LCAP, Common Core, this is going to be the hardest. So, thank you.
Carl, thank you for framing that with such clarity and passion, and we will have a chance to interact with you in the program with some different questions. I'm now going to turn this to Dr. Vicki Graff, who, as I mentioned, is also a member of the statewide task force, and she's going to share more details on how this work is progressing.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces, and nice to be back. And I want to thank Maureen for inviting me to be a part of this. And I also want to thank Carl for his very thoughtful comments. I mean, I've been in this field for over 30 years, and I went into graduate school just after the passage of Public Law 94-142, which was passed in 1975. So we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of the passage of that law. And I don't know how many of you were around at that time, but we had, situations where children with disabilities weren't even allowed to come to school. The principal would have to say, I'm sorry, but if you're in a wheelchair or if you have multiple disabilities or severe cognitive disabilities, I'm sorry, I don't have the personnel, don't have the staff. You're going to have, to the parent, you're going to have to take your child home. And so parents would have to either send their children to a private school and pay the tuition, or they would educate their children at home. So the federal law was originally about access, just physical, getting kids into the public school. And these were families that were paying taxes. These were citizens who were paying taxes, and just to be able to get their kids to school, we had to pass a federal law. So where are we now? So what's happening to our students with disabilities now? They're in school, but as Shane said earlier, special education has been more or less a place and not a set of services. And so I think in some ways we have ourselves to blame in the field that we've set up this very structured system. It's been very compliance-driven, making sure that all of you as administrators are signing the IEP appropriately, that you're participating in the IEP meeting, all the rules and regulations. But what are the outcomes? How are our students doing? Are they graduating from school? Are they dropping out of school? Are they going on for employment? Are they going on to college? And so forth. And I just want to share an observation from my class this fall. I have an intro class with our undergraduate students. I have 17, 4 of whom have self-disclosed that they have a disability. And these are kids, young kids, they're kids to me, young adults who have learning disabilities, dyslexia, ADHD under a Section 504 plan. We also have students here at the university who have autism, high-level autism. So we know these students are capable if we're able to provide them with the appropriate education that they so readily deserve and should be having. So it's a great honor for you to be a part of the task force, and Carl and I are using a PowerPoint that some of you may have seen if you were at the AXA conference. I understand Maureen Burness and Vicki Barber were just at the AXA conference in San Diego. So this is a PowerPoint that's been traveling around to help educate all of us as educators, but more importantly, and we'll hear a little bit later in terms of the report that's going to be written, it's important that the public, your neighbors, understand what needs to happen, what needs to change. And as both Shane and Carl have said, it's going to be a major mindset, change in mindset about persons with disabilities. I still remember as a child living in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and a family moved in with a young man who had, we used the term mentally retarded at that time. We don't use that term any longer. We say an intellectual disability, cognitive disability. And as soon as that family moved in, any family in the neighborhood who had a young girl said, don't ever come into contact with that young man. You just don't know what he's going to do. All these myths, misconceptions that we have about persons with disabilities, these low expectations that we have. So I think we've got some major work to do in terms of our belief system and what we're all capable of doing and sharing responsibility. So the task force is charged with developing a policy and implementation plan to guide California's transformation of programs and outcomes for students with disabilities. So that's the major charge of it. It's been a year-long process. I'm so grateful that all the stars were aligned, that we have Michael Kirst as the chair of the state board. This seems to be a passion for Michael Kirst. I'm really so thrilled. Obviously, the financial piece of it for the state, I think, is a major concern. Special education is very expensive. I'm sure Steve Zimmer, Donna Muncy, Matt Hill, you know, in terms of LAUSD, what the costs are and so forth. I mean, and I'm not just talking about services, but also litigation that goes on. It's an expensive proposition, especially when we don't do it right. Then we have to step up and we have to open up our pocketbooks. We also have Linda Darling-Hammond as the chair of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. Once again, she has personal passion for this area as well as professional, so we have her there. The CDE is represented by Rich Zeiger. Of course, Carl is the chair, and then Maureen Burness and Vicki Barber, longtime administrators throughout the state of California, who are leading our team. Then we have ex officio members as well. So there's a lot of staff going on. But, in terms of stakeholders, we wanted everybody to have a voice. We wanted to hear from everyone with regard to what are the issues, what's the vision, what are the dreams, where do we want to go? And we were all told to think big, think out of the box. Let's create a new vision in terms of education in California. So we have parents, we have both gen ed and special ed teachers, principals, superintendents, and you can read the rest of the members. There are about 3 of us from higher education, from universities, both those of us who work in the area, students with mild disabilities, as well as a faculty member who works in the area of students with low incidence disabilities, to make sure that we're representing our entire population. We also have charter schools involved. I know there are challenges with regard to charter schools. We have great examples of Chime and Wish, who are fully included charter schools, so that's not an issue for them, but some of our other charter schools, it is a struggle in terms of how to appropriately educate students with disabilities. Great concern that we have, again, diverse representation across the task force, and everything has been very public. I remember at the last meeting in September in Sacramento, I'm the co-chair of the Educator Preparation Subcommittee, and we had representatives from so many different department agencies within California, advocacy groups, parent groups, all listening to everything we were saying. Everything has been recorded. It's all on a public website through the San Mateo County Office of Education, so everything is very transparent. So we've been holding public hearings up and down the state. I have to say one of the most informative for me was at the Riverside State School for the Deaf. Have any of you been to the State School for the Deaf? Okay, we have two people. Yeah. It was my first visit. I got lost. I don't sign. I was the minority. It was a fascinating experience to not sign and to be able to communicate with the young people who were there, the educators that were there. That's a group that we have to pay close attention to in terms of what we call least restrictive environment. They call it language-rich environment. And so just a different take on this. So I've learned a lot through this, just being on this task force. My area especially, we have 13 categories within the federal law. I'm not an expert in all of those by any means. So this diversity of students that we're talking about is quite broad, and all of us have to help educate each other with regard to that. Again, opportunities for input. I hope some of you might have had the opportunity to look at that. So now we have the 5 committees, subcommittees, that are writing papers and making recommendations. I'm chairing the educator preparation. Originally it was teacher preparation, and we realized we can't forget our administrators. We're also concerned about related services in terms of, especially in the area of counseling, school psychologists, speech and language, and so forth. So it's a much broader area now in terms of looking at how we prepare future educators as well as our current educators. What was really interesting, all of you are in the schools now. How can we help you to be able to up your game and your knowledge and skills? So we are looking very specifically at how we can provide professional development for our current educators as well. Matt Navo, superintendent from Sanger Unified, and we have 2 of his colleagues here, which I'm thrilled that they're going to talk about the Sanger, would we call it the Sanger Miracle, but to hear from the Sanger Unified School District. So we have a superintendent who's chairing the Evidence-Based Service Delivery Subcommittee, and you're going to hear later about the transformation that's gone on in Sanger that I think is very comparable to your demographics in the Promised Neighborhood schools. I think it's very important to recognize those districts around the state that are taking a hard look at this and are being successful, because then we know it's not impossible. We know it is doable, it's possible, it's hard work, but it is possible. So I'm thrilled that Sanger is here to talk about their story. Then assessment and accountability. David Gordon from Sacramento, superintendent, County Office of Education there, looking at how we're going to be assessing our students with disabilities with regard to Common Core, and certainly for our students with low incidence disabilities, this is going to be quite a challenge for us. Early learning. I've, again, learned so much about some of our gaps with regard to providing appropriate early education for our students with more significant disabilities, and how they often don't get the opportunity to be with typical peers, that they tend to be segregated settings for our very young children. And what a wonderful opportunity to be able to integrate young kids, able-bodied, typical developing children, along with children with significant needs, to be able to learn from each other as very young children. So there are going to be some very interesting recommendations coming out of there. And then Mary Samples is dealing with the finance subcommittee. This is going to be a huge issue in terms of where's the funding going to come from. And we used to have a number of different initiatives to be able to prepare educators in terms of grants and scholarships, and of course that went away. So we're starting to look at some options to encourage some of our gen ed teachers to come back and get ed specialist credentials and so forth. Incentives for universities to have professional development for their faculty, as well as scholarships for beginning teachers as well. So we're under, so some additional resources. I have to say that the last resource there, Dr. Thomas Hare at the Harvard Graduate School is going to be a key resource for us. He was in the U.S. Department of Education at one time, is one of our preeminent scholars in the field of special education, and he's going to be a critical friend, if you will, in terms of the report that's going to be coming out. So it's wonderful to have that support from him. So we're at the stage now where we only have one more meeting. December 2nd is our last meeting, so the report is due very shortly. We're looking at drafts right now, but you'll see that they've hired Richard Colvin, who, again, if those of you who used to read he was a writer for the LA Times in the area of education, because the charge has been, this report has to be something that's comprehensible and understandable, that you can talk about at your kitchen table. So we're going to try and get away from jargon. I mean, you know us in special education, we have an amazing alphabet soup. I can talk in acronyms all day, but that doesn't help our public to understand who we are and what we're about. So Richard Colvin his charge is to make this a very comprehensible, accessible report. And then Alice Parker is working, who is a former state director of special education, to put the content together. So the overarching theme, as Carl mentioned, that we really are very firm on this, that we should be thinking of all children as starting or being a part of general education. We should not make assumptions that just if a child has a disability, that, if a child is in a wheelchair, maybe they need access and ramps, but the actual academic instruction doesn't need to be adapted for them. So a disability doesn't mean that, a child requires special ed services. But we have a system that's grounded in expertise, responsive to students' needs, and focused on student results. So I'm going to now ask you to do a little work. What I'd like you to do is take a look at these two questions here. And I'd like you to talk to your neighbor. And I'd like you to say, to kind of give us some feedback. How can we best prepare general and special educators to successfully address the needs of all students in California's diverse classrooms across all instructional settings? So let's just start with this question right now. What do you need in terms of professional development in your current position to be able to meet the goal that we just talked about? And then if you have suggestions in terms of future educator preparation, that would be great. But let's just start with your needs right now in your schools, with your staff. What do you need in order to really be able to address the needs of students, specifically students with disabilities, so that they can be successful and be college and career ready? So talk to your neighbor, take a couple of minutes, and then we'll get some input from you. Thank you. Start to wrap up those wonderful conversations that you're having. All right, before we hear from our YPI folks, we're going to ask Steve Zimmer. We're going to put Steve on the spot here to come up and share some of his thoughts about this topic. And Steve, maybe you'll talk a little bit about your own personal background for people who don't know as a teacher and so forth.
Good morning. Thank you. Very brave to ask me to come up. More breaking down of frontiers. So thank you all for giving me a chance. Good morning. And yes, back in my civilian life, I was a teacher, a counselor for 17 years in the area of the Hollywood, East Hollywood Promise Zone and Promise neighborhood, and that's also where I live. I actually live right in the heart of the zone, so the work is incredibly important to me for a number of reasons, and not the least of which is the students, the children that I spend my entire life growing up around are all going to be beneficiaries of the investment that you're making. And when Dixon talks about the grants, it's all very impressive. But none of it matters unless we do the work that we're doing here today. It just doesn't matter. I've seen money, and I know Superintendent Cullen and Dr. Martin and others here, we've seen money come and go. We've seen a lot of money. And resources matter. Believe me, look at any of my campaign literature. Resources matter, I promise. But they don't make change unless we do the work that we're doing today. And I just want to again thank Dr. Maureen Kindle. People write dissertations, and but hers sits right on my shelf. And but more importantly than that, she's made that work real in kind of every living and breathing moment to make this happen. She is all about this work here at LMU is all about breaking down the barriers. And a lot of us have said for a long time that we need to get away from the divisions between charter, pilot, all the different things that are created to tear us apart, and understand that we are part of the work together. And no place is that happening more than the work of Chime and Wish to challenge us every day to not only look at the model in a charter school for how we can do comprehensive full inclusion, but also to challenge us that there's no reason why this can't happen in every one of our public schools. And to the rest of the charter community, the mythology that charter schools cannot serve every single student, regardless of whether or not they have special needs, is also a mythology. So that's the kind of work that we're talking about, breaking down these barriers. And so I want to thank you for coming together today and doing this work. And then maybe, just maybe, communicating on days that are not early Saturday mornings here on the west side, because that's where the actually essential work happens. I want to say a couple of things about our progress. And the first is that maybe not very quietly, but very importantly, the 25 years after IDEA, 40 years after IDEA, 25 years after ADA, the district is finally taking some of the courageous steps towards breaking down the silos, towards ending segregation. And we want to say that clearly and directly, that the separating and the isolating of our students with low to moderate incidence special education needs has been segregation, and is something that we should stand against the same way we've stood against the other forms of segregation that we are trying to address. And so the efforts to integrate our former special education centers with our elementary schools and middle schools is important work, and it's important work that we should know about, that we should support, and we should all be a part of. If you want to see an example of how that is happening and how that is working, I invite you to just go up Centinela and take a visit to what was formerly the McBride Special Education Center, is now the Grandview Educational Complex, fully combined and integrated with Grandview Boulevard Elementary School. Is not easy work. It is not easy to get folks to think outside of the silos. It is not easy to get folks to be multilingual when it comes to our work around our students with special needs, because we actually speak different languages sometimes, and it is very, very important for us to be able to support the work of truly coming together. And when those fences came down, I happened to be there on the first day that the fence literally was taken down. It was an important moment in the history of the school district. remarkably, it did not end up on the front page of the LA Times. But that's okay, because it's that kind of real change that doesn't get reported and doesn't get a lot of attention, but could really stands to transform lives. The other thing that I want to say in terms of a coming together message is there's a lot of temptation after this Tuesday's election to say that we are a nation divided and that we are communities divided and all, that whole narrative that you can just turn on any television station and that's what you hear. But there are issues that can bring us together. And we will be going to Capitol Hill. And we will be meeting with Republicans, and we will be saying, on this particular issue, on the issue of the full funding of the federal IDEA mandate, that is not a Republican or Democrat issue. That is a national issue. That is an issue that affects every family across every political spectrum, or on every spectrum that we might consider. And that this is an area that Republican leadership can really come together with Democratic leadership, and in a real social justice issue. If you want to show that you care, public education is a great place to show that care. And it is a place where there is some bipartisan agreement. For those of you who don't know, the federal IDEA mandate is 40%. The federal government funds the Individual with Disability Education Act at around 16.2%. The annual structural deficit in a district like LAUSD is around $350 million. And that is an area where the federal government can really affect our lives on the ground. Two very quick last things. We need to give more attention, and I'm very, very glad that Dr. Estrada and Dr. Levandas will be presenting to you today. There is, even within the area of IDEA and of our students with special needs, there is great and urgent disparity. There is urgent disparity between families who have, because of affluence and access, have access to greater services and greater ability to advocate. And we have to look at, when we're looking at issues around our promised neighborhoods and the different assets that our students bring to the classroom every day, we have to look at ways that we can bring our expertise together around English language learners, around issues of students with special needs, that we don't look at this as multiple challenges, but as multiple assets and multiple opportunities, and a unique venue for all of us to work together. Last thing is that the whole idea of Promised Neighborhood is not just East Los Angeles, and it's not just Pacoima. The whole idea of Promised Neighborhood is that we build models through Promised Neighborhood that can be all of Los Angeles, that can be all of our school districts, all of our neighborhoods. The idea of this promise isn't just a promise to one particular group of students or one particular group of parents or one particular group of schools. The idea of Promised Neighborhoods is we say, here is what is possible and here is what should be. Everywhere, not just here, everywhere. And so the work that you are doing, the efforts to try and kind of break down the walls and really show that we can work together on behalf of kids is, yes, of course, about the communities that you care about so much and have dedicated your lives to, but it's really about all of us. It's really about, this is the model that can lead Los Angeles forward and actually make the promise of public education real for all students, no matter where they live, no matter where they were born, and that this idea that public education, every student that comes to the schoolhouse door, can really play a role in galvanizing and propelling all children in our society forward, it can happen again. And the seeds of that are happening in Promise Neighborhoods. So you're part of very important work, and I thank you and thank the panel for hosting us. And again, thank you to Maureen Kindle.
Well, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate your comments, and I think that's a great transition to now hear from some of you in terms of what your needs are to be able to move in this direction. So I know there were some very energetic conversations going on, so can we get some reporting out? And Clarence has got a microphone, so that as we are recording this, we would like to get you on the microphone. Don't be shy now. I know you all were having some very good conversations. Use my wait time here.
Good morning. I believe we need professional development, but I also believe as a teacher, we need to see it in action. I can give a very real example in that I was able to observe Chime in action. While I've had the professional developments to know that you apply 3-to-1, maybe now it's 4 or 5-to-1, positives for every corrective. But when you're in the classroom and in the heat of the moment, sometimes that goes out the window. But to be reminded again, and then again, like I said, to see it in action is very effective and helpful for teachers who are actually on the front lines.
Great, thank you.
That conversation here was regarding being prepared. We shared how we mainstream a lot of our ED, emotionally disturbed students. And we find that to be the toughest group. The SLD, specific learning disabilities, there's plenty of research, plenty of strategies, plenty of things teachers know what to do and how to do it. Obviously, physical disabilities, we know what to do, but it's the emotional stuff, the behavioral stuff that I think can be the most frustrating piece. And we find that as we mainstream that to be the most difficult piece from the classroom. The teachers, the gen ed teachers, at least in our experience, they feel, they've expressed feeling unprepared and unsupported. And so but it's tough because I don't know that that's where it comes to becomes more individualized. That's the real individualized part of teaching students with disabilities because every child is so different. And what works today is not going to work tomorrow or the day after. And how do you accommodate for that? Because you will work one day and not the next. And that's the piece that's very frustrating, at least that we've found in the last, particularly this year because we doubled our student special ed population. We went from 8% to 16% from last year to this year, out of nowhere. As well as our EL population doubled. We were not prepared for that. So we're in the thick of, we feel that we are in a reactive mode this year. And so this is a very real conversation on our school campus because we feel, wow, we weren't ready for this. But that's not a choice.
Could you identify where you are and also the previous speaker, if you could also identify where you are?
Cesar Lopez from Apex Academy.
And you're a middle school, is that right? Or high school?
7-12.
7-12, okay. Very good.
And Ryan Ballard, I'm the resource specialist teacher at Monsignor Oscar Romero Charter School, one of the YPI schools, middle school.
Good morning. Olivia Robledo, San Fernando Institute for Applied Media. And at our table, we were talking about additional professional development for teachers and preparing them and giving them that support. But also, as a principal, I feel that before we even offer that, we need to have a change of mindset. Sometimes gen ed teachers are so challenged, and when they find that they have a special needs child in their classroom and don't know what to do with them, they identify the child as the resource teacher's child, not my child. And so I think it's about making gen ed teachers feel comfortable, first of all, so that when we offer the professional development, they'll be ready to receive that. And at this point, I don't feel that most of them are ready. They don't have the mindset to embrace the children as all the children being theirs.
So can I just follow up on, well, let me just follow up and then I'll turn it over to Shauna to respond. But what do you think might help in terms of the mindset? Would it be like visiting schools like Chime and Wish where you can see what's possible and be able to maybe work with some other general educators who have been able to, you know,
Absolutely, and I also feel that they need to know of the successes. The
Yes.
people at the university who have autism and are truly successful. And I have a personal story. I was a single mom with 4 children attending CSUN. And there was often times when I wanted to quit. And I remember getting into an elevator and seeing a person in a wheelchair that was using a stick or something to press the buttons to change the level. And that made me feel this tiny because I was healthy and I was able and I didn't have the challenges that person had. But that person, without speaking, inspired me to go forward, to understand that if we're really determined to do things, we must take the jumps on that we have to do and be strong and so forth. And so I remember those moments. It happened a couple of times. And so that's what I think our teachers need to see, is that that perseverance, that willingness to go forward in life no matter what we're handed. You know, it's possible to be successful. I think when they see a label on a child, they think, okay, they're only going to go to this level. They can only go and be a clerk, or they can go and just finish high school. That's their vision. So they already make a decision for that child. And I think that is very unfair. But if they see the successes, if they, you know, through videos, or I'm not quite sure how we could have all these people, inspire our teachers, but they need to see those successes and understand that their way of looking at these children is really a prejudice. It really is. It's an ism. And so I think that if we can change that mindset, then bring in the PD to support them, I think that would make a difference.
I want to just comment on what you mentioned in terms of the label, because the federal government says we need to have an eligibility, you know, on an IEP before we can provide services, and so we have to show how that student meets the criteria. And, you know, there's some positive aspects of that. But on the other hand, I think, you know, you just very eloquently said that for the general public, when they hear the term Down syndrome, or they hear the term autism, and so forth, I think they immediately go to, again, the deficit perspective, absolutely. So that's been a big part of the conversation we've had in the task force. Is there an opportunity for us to have a conversation with the federal government to say that maybe we need to move beyond this notion of eligibility criteria based on disability, based on labels, and maybe look at what individual supports are that the student might need? And because, as you said, you know, if I say autism, you know, we have one set of, you know, expectations, but then another student will just completely blow those out of the water. So the label really doesn't help inform us in that regard. So if we can come in, and this sort of goes to the second point of evidence-based practices, this multi-tiered systems of support, which we're going to hear from Sanger, for example, and Shauna had mentioned it in our previous colloquium, where we don't look at labels, but we look at individual students and chart progress as to how students are successful, then provide the supports that are necessary. Maybe that's a better way to go. So I think that's a very important point. I want to have Shauna a chance.
I just want to comment on your comment on the teacher with the mindset of this is your student because it's a resource student because the child has a disability. And I think we have the finest teachers on the front lines working with all students across the district, across LA, and we all want to differentiate, and we all want to serve them and make those changes. And I think what would really help teachers with their mindset, and what we would ask from the state task force, is to consider, before we become teachers, when we're in that pre-service stage, to really consider how we train folks. Because if we're training pre-service practitioners to work in that silo as a general ed teacher or as a special ed teacher, we condition them in their first years as a professional to believe that the special ed teacher has all the expertise, has all that special magic, and that the general ed teacher doesn't have that expertise. When in fact, that general ed teacher has a ton of expertise and has all of the strategies, and they could really work together to make an authentic, meaningful program for students. So I would look at the state task force and say, instead of this red program for general ed teachers and a blue program for special ed teachers, if we could credential folks in one of those more progressive alternative ways, and we can look at graduating folks with a lavender credential, and then as they move along, it gets to be a deeper purple when they have expertise from serving all kids. That would really help us with our mindset.
So I would just say that from my perspective, and really this is about wearing my lens as a member of the Executive Council from the Charter Operated Programs for Options 3 in Los Angeles, and even with our schools, specifically with the local charter schools, I'm going to ask that the task force also consider PD for parents, because we've had the opposite challenge. We use an inclusive model, and so we've had parents that have had these intensive services for kids, and they're in elementary and they get to us in middle school, and it's like, what do you mean that I need to have that person following my child? And it's like, no, we're going to actually take care of them. We will actually provide services for them, and we will make sure that your kid is going to be okay. So for us, we've had the flip of that in terms of parents who have been accustomed to having their kids isolated and in segregated classes, and so when they come to a school that really does serve in an inclusive model, they also need that mind shift. And so I would just ask that the task force consider PD workshops developed to help parents be able to make that shift.
Any other comments? Okay, we have a couple more, and then we're going to ask Carl to kind of tell us about next steps.
I would just like to reiterate what was shared over here, because in a school site, I think what we're doing from the very beginning when we're preparing teachers, we're already setting them up for failure if we're not helping them understand that they are teachers of all children. You're not going to go out and teach to the middle of the bell curve. You're going to have the spectrum of students and the spectrum of disabilities, and they come in many flavors. And I think that if it starts there, they don't go out and we're having to work at trying to change that after it's been established with teachers that are veteran teachers anywhere down the line from first year to those that have tenure that are ready to retire. It's very difficult to have them change after they've been so entrenched in a culture of they are someone else's kids. So I think that if we're going to really turn the tide, it has to start at the teacher training, because I see our new special ed teachers coming out, and they're brand new and they're green as any gen ed new teacher going out there, and they're supposed to be the resource. They're supposed to be the specialist when they don't even have the basic fundamentals, and yet we're having these expectations of them. I think we're setting them up for failure, and I think that if we can go in there, I love the idea of the color coding our credential as we get more tools in our belt, that we are teachers of all children, and I totally agree with it, and I think it needs to start there. It's more difficult to change someone that's already been blinded in teaching one way, and have them start with that more inclusive mindset. And I totally support that, and believe that that is somewhere where we need to change and we need help with.
Could you identify your program?
My name is Anita Cepeda. I'm the Executive Director of Vaughn Next Century Learning Center.
This will be our last comment, and then we're going to ask Dr. Cohn to wrap it up and tell us about next steps for the task force.
I'm Katya Handel, and I'm also at Wandex Entry Learning Center. And it was funny because she was talking about that. That's exactly. I was fortunate enough that at CSUN they did have a dual program where you could do the multiple subject with your special ed credential. And my thought when we were discussing the issues in the table was that if we as gen ed teachers could also do our student teaching in a special ed setting, and vice versa, which I was fortunate enough to get that. So you get that perspective of what the gen ed has to go through, you know, because gen ed complains, oh, you know, well, the special ed doesn't know the content, but then the special ed complains, oh, well, they don't understand the disabilities. But having that kind of a program, because I don't think it's offered anymore, if that could be brought back, I think it would bring back that genuine teaching that everybody else has talked about.
One of the exciting things about being involved in California educational policy making right now, we have a governor who isn't intimidated by the federal government. And that's really an important concept. So I think the idea is if we can actually get this right in California, and Vicki made references to some federal changes that are needed, we're at a place where if California gets this right, we can lead the nation on this issue. Too often, school districts start with what are the state and federal government telling us we're supposed to be doing. Whenever anybody has asked me about whatever success we had in Long Beach, I always answer, we started out not let's improve test scores so that we can win the Broad Prize. Let's do this so that we can influence someplace else. It was always fundamentally about let's do the right thing. Let's bring everybody together, and let's not start with what the state or federal government is telling us. Let's bring everybody together and let's move to do the right thing. So we're headed toward the completion of this task force work. Richard Colvin's involvement is critical because we want a report that captures wide audiences. I just started reading Bob Herbert's new book on America and what's gone wrong, and journalists have this ability to write in ways that the rest of us can't do that. So what we want is a report that captures parents, policymakers, everybody, because we're going to tell this compelling story about the plight of youngsters that we all are committed to serving better. So once the report is finished, we want it to go to the ed policy committees of both the Assembly and the State Senate. Of course, it will go to the State Board. One of the other pluses for California right now is the extraordinary influence that Mike Curtis, the president of the State Board, has with Governor Brown. So obviously, some of this will require additional resources. But we want to look at this as a tremendous opportunity to make the kind of change in California that the rest of the country will say, you know what, once again, California has gotten it right. So that's our plan moving forward, to come up with this very compelling narrative around the recommendations for change that will better serve students with disabilities.
So we've heard about great challenges, but more importantly, amazing opportunities. And this work in the state level, I think, is so exciting and will be a game changer for all of us. So I'd really like to thank our panelists, Dr. Cohn, Dr. Graff, Yvette King-Berg. Let's thank them for this presentation. You know, everyone is so critical in this work, but I want to acknowledge someone who's here today, Sydney Kwan, who's the director of LAUSD Special Ed Option 3 Charter Operated Programs and a graduate of the LMU program. Sydney, would you say hello to everybody? We're going to transition right now to our next panel. I'm going to have them come right up. So we've laid some groundwork talking about what's happening at the state level. Board Member Zimmer talked about his vision for LAUSD and what's happening there. These are very, very exciting changes. As we continue to think about being inclusive and we think about meeting the needs of all children, it's so important for us as we think about our children with disabilities to think of that intersection with our children with disabilities and our English language learners. And so we have a shorter panel now, and then we'll take a break. But this panel is populated by some wonderful folks, just some great experts. First of all, it's my great privilege to introduce my wonderful colleague here at LMU, Dr. Magali Labadenz, who's a professor of education and the former director of bilingual programs, not only in Spanish, but she founded our bilingual program in Mandarin. She's the founder of and current director of our Center for Education of English Learners, and a well-known leader nationally and internationally in the work for English learners, who has served on a number of state task forces. With her is Dr. Carla Estrada, who is the coordinator of the Division of Special Education in LAUSD District ISIC. And Dr. Estrada is a graduate of the LMU program, of which we're so proud of. And also Fidel Ramirez, who is the Director of Youth Services for YPI. So let's listen to this great panel.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all again for the repeaters, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I'm very excited, and I want to echo and underscore all the wonderful possibilities that we have in our lifetime to really change the panorama of teacher education and professional development. This is one of the most exciting times that I've experienced in my 30-year career in education. And our panel is really going to address some of the things that Board Member Steve Zimmer pointed out, and that is the idea of multidimensionality, that our students with learning disabilities are multidimensional. They have multiple backgrounds, they are diverse within diversity, and that sometimes in our schools and in our practice we tend to essentialize them by the name, as has been mentioned before in the prior panel, the title and the name of their disability. And I think language, as a language specialist, I think language is very important. And I really want to encourage whatever influence this panel may have in reshaping and restructuring the language of special education for our nation. We have a wonderful opportunity. Our panel, we really want to create a space for voice and dialogue. We want to personalize this a little bit more. As Shane mentioned, we have two people here who have their own unique personal perspectives and an ability to create a dialogue in a space. It was mentioned in the previous panel about time and the need for dialogue, and I think that these spaces can be replicated in so many other ways, as we mentioned before. So Carla's going to begin by sharing her work very briefly, her dissertation work, that really examines the intersectionality between students who are also English learners. And then Fidel will share his perspective as a parent and also as an educator. And I'm going to turn it over now to Carla.
Everybody. So as we look at this intersection, I think the first part of it is being able to understand what it actually looks like. I think that's the first piece of it, that awareness of what this population looks like here in our lovely state of California. So when we look at our English language learners, we see a population of students that we have our ELs, and we also have our students with disabilities. It's interesting, at the state level, we're starting to see more and more folks look at that intersection of our students with disabilities who are also ELs. Especially as we've started to look at our English language learners, also within that population, those long-term English learners, And so who are those long-term English learners? And when we look at our students with disability, most students that are ELs, that are also students with disabilities, are long-term English learners. And we know how important reclassification and that whole experience for our ELs is. It's even more important for our students with disabilities. So as we look at this population, we look at culture and we also look at language. And so when we look at our English learners with disabilities, we see in California, we have a great opportunity because we're a state with a large number of students with disabilities and also a state with large numbers of ELs. So in my dissertation, I was able to really examine that across the nation and be able to see where are some of those opportunities for us as we look at both of these populations. And so when we look at nationally, what is the greatest number of our English language learners that are also students with disabilities? And the disability category we see the most is our specific learning disability category. And in LAUSD, we've definitely started exploring that further and examining that data on what might be some of the reasons why we have this as a higher category. And those of us who've been working in special education a long time know some possible reasons for that, but it's something we need to explore further and fully understand. Within my research, I also was able to look at the kaleidoscope of those ELs with disabilities, because like a kaleidoscope, as you turn that dial, the vision of what you're actually looking at looks differently. And so when we look at students that are students with disabilities and specifically English learners, I really wanted to examine how is language development, which is so critical to success of English learners, how is that impacted once a student is identified as a student with disabilities? And what I found was quite eye-opening. I think it was more confirming. I think we know that our students with disabilities that are also English learners typically do not reclassify. But I think it was also important to look at a category, a broad category, like specific learning disabilities, and understand it at a deeper level within each of those areas or disorders within that category. And then I also had the opportunity to have a small sample of a case study and really look at the individual student. So I was able to review the educational records of 3 students with disabilities who are English learners and have a specific learning disability to understand what their language development experience has been. And what we found is most of them had not reclassified, but more importantly, the language development aspect of the student was not necessarily at the forefront once they were identified for special education services. Many students did not actually receive those supports and services around language. And in my research, I also found that sometimes once a student was identified as a student with disabilities, sometimes the disability and supports and services trumped language development, and that's not the way it should be. And so I think that was also another level of awareness that came out from my research. And so let's look at just what some of those patterns were. Within my district of study, I was able to examine over 20,000 students that are English learners with disabilities. And as you can see from this bar chart, you can see that ELs with SLD was the greatest number of students with disabilities within the district of study. You can also see that the grade level, and I think this raised some questions of what happened as the kids started to progress. There was a huge peak in middle school, and then what actually happened to these students as we moved forward in their grade levels. So it raised a lot of questions regarding that pattern. We also saw, which I think is even more powerful as we look at educating our English learners with disabilities, is where their English language development, their proficiency level was based on the CELT, the statewide language development assessment our students have to take. And as you can see here, most of our students get stuck at that intermediate level. And typically these students, I examined them each by grade level, and as we got further up into the higher high school grades, they were still staying at that intermediate level. And that's after a whole career in our districts. So it's something that definitely raises the awareness of, has language development actually been provided to these students with disabilities? And I think another big area that was quite powerful within the SLD category, we have multiple types of disorders. And what's a pattern that we saw within this population, over 20,000 students, is The highest category that students are identified for as English language learners with SLD is in the auditory processing area, which really raises questions of, is it a language acquisition issue or is it a disability need? So more questions that it raised. So I think the greatest piece that I found from my study was the awareness level of this population that typically are seen separately, and I think really highlights the powerful piece of this group of folks coming together is how are we collaborating together to understand that intersection of our students who are coming with not only possible disability needs, but also language development needs. And so overall, as I mentioned before, the case study really revealed that most of our students with learning disabilities that had an SLD category, minimal English language development instruction was occurring or was found evident in the records that I reviewed, including individual educational plans or programs. So the IEPs actually reflected very limited reference to language development and how that was being addressed amongst the students with disabilities. So just a sharing of that experience, and so I'll hand it back over to Madonna.
One of the things that's a hallmark of our doctoral program here in Educational Leadership for Social Justice is that you can't just do a study. You have to ask really good questions, you have to look at the data, but then you have to answer the question, so what? What am I going to do with this information? And that question was a question that I had asked you, Carla, and I think that you have done some very important initial work in addressing this in LAUSD, and I'm wondering if you would like to share some of your efforts.
So some of the opportunities that came out of this work was recognizing the collaboration that must occur with our EL, our folks responsible for English language learners, but to understand that we're all responsible for all students and that these intersections occur at all levels. And so one of the first activities was first sharing the data with my special education and EL partners around, in our own district, what does this data look like? And I think it was quite eye-opening. What I've seen in our district is, as a result of that, is the data around English learners and students with disabilities is a priority for all now. Not just our students with disabilities or our special education department, but for our EL department as well. And so it's something that I definitely see grow. We also had to create opportunities for collaboration to occur amongst us at the central level. Too often we ask our teachers, we ask our administrators to engage in that practice, but do we ourselves model that and show how that work can actually occur? And so we had an opportunity to bring English language, those responsible for that EL work with special education specialists to do some professional development together. And so we went through our own learning through the OPAL Institute to review the OPAL tool, observation tool for ELs, and what that would look like for students with disabilities. And so we engaged in learning together. The other piece of it was also helping our work together in co-presenting to our teachers and administrators on how that work can look like in that intersection between the EL specialists as well as our special education specialists. And the feedback we got from teachers was that they appreciate being able to see people working side by side, and that it's not just something that we tell people in practice, but that we actually show them that we can do that work together.
Great. Something to continue to think about is that how do we model, if we're trying to break down the barriers of our work in classrooms, how do we model that at whatever level that we're in? So Fidel, you have a very unique experience both in your role as an administrator and also as a parent of a child with disabilities. And I'm wondering if you could share some of the insights. We had a wonderful planning conversation that we spent over an hour talking about, for a half-an-hour panel, about how we would prepare for this. But you had some wonderful experiences in some of the messages that you received as a parent about having a child who is bilingual and needs special education services.
Sure, thank you. Good morning. It's the morning. And very humbling to be here. It's so exciting listening to all the speakers. And quite frankly, I love coming here, but then I also love going home because I'm excited and I'm pumped. And quite frankly, that's what we need as educators. We too need to be motivated and enthusiastic about the type of work we do on a daily basis. And so I commend you for being here too. I'm excited to share my story with you. And my story really is twofold, the administrative focus, but also as a parent of someone, of a little scholar that has some learning disabilities, but tremendous potential. And that's what I want to share. I want to share that every single child has the potential to be what they want to be. And starting with that, I think that's the modeling that we're looking for, and that we hope that we can see in every single teacher that we have an interaction with. The reality is, in my credentialing program, I was so blessed to take that one class. Because as an administrator, I realized, oh my God, this is a lot. Oh my goodness. Oh, híjoles, as we say in Spanish. Wow. Okay. So I was so blessed to have taken that one class. We need more. Without question, we need more. And I think I heard someone mention, and I echoed it, I think we need to do more at the credentialing area for all teachers, and including administrators. And quite frankly, my recommendation would be is ongoing. As I mentioned, there's ways of students that come without you knowing. You can prepare for your academic year, and all of a sudden you're, wow, what happened? Where do these wonderful students come from? With specialized challenges, as he inferred. And so, without question, PD is super important. But I also heard my colleague Yvette mention the importance of PD for parents. And so I think that is something that, from parent perspective as well, I would share with you, and that there needs to be awareness. There's this syndrome of, oh, el pobrecito, we call it in Spanish, my poor child. Okay, she's not going to be able to do because. Where in fact, I think we need to shatter this myth that our child cannot succeed because they have a disability. Quite frankly, we need to do a better job as parents, as educators, and as administrators, educating the families that in fact there's great opportunities. Many of our speakers are already inferred that many of their scholars are in their classes here at the universities. So the reality is, I don't think we're doing enough, quite frankly, to kind of inform our parents that yes, it is possible. In fact, your child can be better served at the university if there is that need. And so I took it upon myself to make it a point to inform my parents that not only are they capable, but they have the right to go to the universities. And no, we're not going to belittle the requirements. In fact, the requirements stay the same. And so what we were able to do is kind of empower, if you will, the family, because once you empower the mom, magic happens. And so we were able to capture that synergy, if you will, and quite frankly started transforming schools year in and year out. And every year is a new challenge. But the reality is, then the students believe. Okay? Without question, the challenges are the same, similar to ones that have been shared. There's this notion that you're the special ed teacher. In fact, you're the expert. But we really tried, quite frankly, we did, to collaborate and team teach. And quite frankly, there is need there too. How do you team teach, and how does it look? Somebody mentioned it. We need to see it. Not only we need to see it, I think quite frankly, we need to feel it. We need to be engaged in that environment and do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be exclusively within your school. We have a handful or more schools here. And quite frankly, I think we already have a promising practice with Hollywood and biotech that I'm looking forward to. So those models that we already are establishing here. So, in short, what I'm mentioning really is awareness. Awareness for the parents, awareness for the students, awareness for the teachers, and awareness for the administration. Okay? Because the job gets in the way. But we need to be aware of that. That is important for us to do that responsibility of informing. The understanding. What does that mean? ¿Qué? ¿Tengo una disabilidad? What does that mean? So we need to have a better plan as to ensuring the parents understand what does having a disability really mean. And then the support, without question. Not exclusive in the school. I think as parents, we also want to know what we can do at home. As soon as I get home, then I start my other full-time job, right? And so, in fact, this week, I emailed 4 teachers. How many? 4 teachers, okay, individually. And I wanted to know from them, what can we do as parents to support my son at home? And expectations are the same, so we'll have one-on-one conversations. What can we do for you, my son, okay, to help you become a better student? And so there is that effort of collaboration with family and teacher. And then in the end, I think we all want this as educators. We want self-advocacy. Accept the fact that you have a disability, mijo, okay? And this is how it looks. But it doesn't mean that you're limited. That means you still have the future to look forward to. And so what does that mean? That means you may need to think a little different. That means you need to go this way instead of this way. But you too can make it. So those are some kind of thoughts, kind of reflecting and listening to speakers. I got excited. And so I think this is an opportunity for all of us to have that level of excitement, because we all have that impact on every single child, not exclusive to special ed students, but every single child.
Thanks, Fidel. You shared in our conversation previously, you shared a really wonderful story about reading at home and the way that your family approaches reading to your child at home. And I think that fits so nicely in what teachers sometimes send as messages to families with bilingual children who are English learners who have disabilities, about the nature of reading at home and what parents can do. And I'm wondering if you could share that story.
Sure. I'm fortunate to have 3 beautiful kids, and my youngest is the one that I'm really working hard and supporting. But the reality is, they hear and listen and remember everything you do, without question. And they remind me every day. And so there is this tradition that we have at home, obviously, that we established as a promising practice, if you will, and that supported, again, from the teacher's perspective, but also it's important for us to model. Again, going back to the modeling and actually doing it and engaging. And quite frankly, as a former principal, it's hard. After your 13, 14-hour day, you want to get home, you want to relax. But they're waiting for you. And quite frankly, we have the responsibility. The responsibilities are 24/7. Everybody knows that has parents. So we make it a point to be able to read together as a family. And so some of the gifts that we give our kids are, you have a subscription to a magazine, okay? And so the modeling happens at home as well. We also have, obviously, the read alouds. My college student is also a model for my younger kids, and so they're also reading together. And in fact, as we speak to the teachers, there's a strategy that we share with them that we actually practice. So something that we obviously believe in and advocate and promote.
And Carla, one of the things that you both had something in common in terms of helping current teachers, current administrators, current leaders. Both of you talked about the idea of the humanity and making sure that our students are not just numbers. That is really important to understand the numbers, but really about the humanity that each child brings with them. And understanding, like Fidel was saying, about you have 3 children. They each have a unique and distinct set of ways of being. They have a unique identity. Our students have multiple identities that they interface with all through the course of their school day in their interactions with adults. So I'm wondering that one of the ways that it came about in your dissertation was really tracing the trajectory through those case studies of what their educational experience was like in those students that Carla looked at their cumulative file. And of course, that doesn't tell the whole story of what the life of a child is, but it told a lot. So if you were then to give advice to the school, the teacher, about the way to look at an IEP, for example, what would that advice might be? And Fidel, you're going to share that as well.
So I would recommend, as I work with teachers and I work with administrators around meeting the needs of students with disabilities, is understanding also that language and culture goes beyond just ethnicity. So that's the first piece of that, is understanding how do we look beyond just those basics that we know about and really understand the children, because that's what really helps you to understand too how you're going to target instruction, whether it's a disability or how you're addressing language. And so helping them to look beyond that, because then they're really able to look at the whole child as well. I think Fidel brought up a critical point, and that's the idea of growth mindset. For our students who are English language learners and students with disabilities, they need to understand what is the impact on them, but also how do you move beyond that? That level of resiliency moving forward, that's going to be necessary with the Common Core work that we see coming. That we see that we're already being asked to implement, we see coming as well. That's one of the pieces. The second piece is that growth mindset work. I would say thirdly also is being able to collaborate with each other on not feeling like everybody has to be an expert for everything. I think sometimes we, as educators, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. I know even as a special educator, I always think that I should know everything about every discipline, and I felt like I think Dr. Graff is amazing, and so for her to say that she doesn't know everything about special education made me feel good as well, that we're always constantly learning, and so we do need to collaborate with each other. At the school level, how often do your special educators sit side by side with the EL coordinators or with our general education teachers to do case studies about students, to just talk about how things are working for those students? And so unfortunately, it's not until an IEP occurs that people are expected to come to a table. It should be happening even before that, or it should be something that's an ongoing conversation. Because we do need strategies and ideas to be able to meet the needs of our English language learners with disabilities. Because also, I think it's a very complex situation too. Disability, how does the disability impact the student's ability to learn? And where does language acquisition then also overlay on that as well? And so when I've sat with teachers, for example, they say to me, you know, I'm having trouble really knowing if they're progressing in language development because I'm not sure the kid has autism. So I'm not quite sure if this is something that's related to their disability or language development. And so when we analyze work samples together, what I found is that it's difficult to be able to differentiate. And so being able to sit with a partner who understands the disability side and the language development side, we were able to identify what would be some of the things that the student would have difficulty with being able to demonstrate language development versus some of the patterns as an English learner or a Spanish speaker, where would be some of those linguistic errors that they would make that's common for English learners that are Spanish speakers. So that collaboration, that opportunity to sit together and do some case studies is also something that I would encourage schools and school staff and school districts to create more opportunities for that engagement and that analysis to happen together. Because it's something where even as teachers we need to break down our walls, our classroom walls, and know that it's great that you are willing to connect with your fellow colleagues to be able to problem solve around our students' needs.
In my perfect world, I think all children should have an IEP. And I look at that as a blueprint of success. That's what I strongly believe in. I know there are challenges, and I know we need more funding. Where does Steve go? And so, but I truly believe that will definitely revolutionize, transform, if you will, our schools. On a personal level, I think I ended the conversation with this, and the story is brief. Those 7th graders, they gave me gray hairs, okay? But then they became seniors, and they were so grateful, and they graduated. And they went to college. These are the same 7th graders that came. I was scared. Oh my God, what are you wearing on your face today? It was intimidating. But they delivered. And so what I'm saying is, you never give up on a child. You never give up on a student. Because before you know it, it can be tomorrow, it can be the next week, it can be next month, it can be next year. In this case, it took a little longer. But they thanked me when they graduated. And I'm like, wow, they were listening. They really were engaged. They really were focused. Because we forget that they also have lives. They have social issues they're dealing with every day. We mentioned some folks, we don't even know where they live. And in fact, we'll be surprised when we realize where they live. You have to be also very sensitive to that. So in the end, my contribution would be, we never, ever give up on a child.
Something that you both said that reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you've read the book by John Hattie called Visible Learning for Teachers, and one of his takeaways after doing this meta-analysis of the research on what works in PD for teachers, which have the greatest effect size on student learning, is you both said something about seeing learning through the eyes of a child. Is that every child really deserves to be taught and addressed from how they see the adults, as well as how the adults, of course, engage, interact with each other, plan for their learning as the experts in learning, but seeing learning through the eyes of the child. One last example that I heard Carla talk a little bit about earlier, about the way that at a high school you can plan for these conversations with that master schedule. You know, that sometimes we think the master schedule is written in stone, actually in concrete, or whatever the most hard material is in the world. But you had a very good example of how that idea of the groups coming together, the experts coming together to really dialogue through the eyes of the child. Could you talk about that?
What in our district, we've really been looking at our integration work, our integration of our students with disabilities, and not just saying this has to happen, but what can we rethink as a system around integration that looks different, because we've had these movements where we're just pushing our students with disabilities into the environment, but not necessarily creating the structures for success. Meaning, for example, did we within that structure think about time for the gen ed and the special ed teacher to collaborate, to be able to debrief together, to know if things are moving in the right direction? And so one of the key pieces that we've noticed in that work is that the administrators were quite committed, extremely committed, to rethinking their own structures as a school to make sure that it created opportunities for all kids. And so they created, for example, within their master schedules, co-conferencing periods. So that way, that special education teacher would have time, if their focus is English, they would have a common conferencing period with their gen ed English partners. And so that way they'd be able to sit down together and co-plan what this support would actually look like. And so we learned that creating that master schedule was critical. And these are large, comprehensive high schools. And so people had to really be committed. And more importantly, as we talked about our teachers having opportunities, gen ed and special ed teachers, before they even enter their own classroom, those opportunities to collaborate. In our school sites where I've seen the greatest integration work occur, it is where the administrator, the school leadership really took ownership of this work and this belief and built the structures around that belief system. And so within that opportunity to collaborate, they also made sure that they made those 30 minutes, which are the most precious, teachers in the room know that those 30 minutes are the most important 30 minutes. So what are we going to do during that time? And so they really have had to structure, that's why I talked about analyzing work samples, doing those types of activities. They really had to make sure they structured that conference period time for co-planning to be most effective. And so really examining what you're using as the structures for those collaboration moments is critical. It's not just bringing people to a table. It's really having some powerful activities that you're going to do together to grow together as educators.
La última palabra es para Fidel.
Thank you. Two things. Parent support groups. As simple as that, that's super powerful. And so, because there's a lot of more commonality that parents have that they know. Okay? And then the last thing that I really was successful and really happy to leverage was the college partnerships. College partnerships. Without question, there's experts out there that are willing to come to visit you and talk on these, kind of disclaim a lot of myths that still exist today.
You know, today we've heard such a rich discussion from Magali and Carla and Fidel. I'm going back to one of the things Magali said as a wonderful reminder for all of our work. We get data, we get numbers, and those are so important, and we have to always think about the humanity that is represented in the children behind those numbers and those data. So I want to ask you to join me in thanking Magali and Carla and Fidel for this great panel. And we'll be moving into our break. By the way, we are using hashtag capital TESP, hashtag TESP, for those of you on Twitter today. And you can follow a live Twitter feed, hashtag TESP, all capitals.
Thank you. I just wanted to do a little housekeeping. We're taking a break for 15 minutes, and then we're going to hear some very interesting talk about the Sanger miracle and also about your mindset. The lunch is going to be served, I believe, up here in this room, because during lunch we're going to have a little replay of Harry and Sally from last time, if you recall. And I also want you to look at your evaluation, which is in your folder. And as you know from past, we need this. Now we have a lot of data that for going back several years from you, and we need to have you complete this and give it to us by the end of the day. And I think we also need you to sign out, which we'll find out more about when the dean makes this special announcement later today. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to break now. We'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.